So I would like to introduce the Center of Pakistan International Relations. It is a strategic think tank building a positive narrative at national and international levels. COPAIR initiates and advocates policies of national development in order to build a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient Pakistan. COPAIR aims to foster an effective foreign policy of Pakistan and to forge the strong diplomatic, political, and economic ties of the country, along with the provision of a platform for the engagement of foreign and local speakers and intelligentsia to discuss various global issues in achieving sustainable development goals.
So,
So, Center of Pakistan International Relations is also dedicated to the study of defense and security studies, and it seeks to promote an in-depth analysis of the national and international affairs, and especially the one which thrives on the intersection of the policy formulation and policy making. Today, we are gathered here to observe the International Human Rights Day and to highlight the plight of innocent Kashmiri brethren suffering from serious human rights violation from the Indian occupational forces from the last 70 years. I want to give a quick statistical view about these human rights violation. According to a report, more than 94,000 Kashmiris have been killed, more than 22,000 women widowed, and 10,000 raped and molested. More than 100,000 children have been orphaned by the Indian military and paramilitary troops in Indian occupied Kashmir since 1980s. Uh, in this lieu, I would like to share a small documentary clip with you. Uh, Shujal sir, kindly play the clip.
Kashmir, oh Kashmir, we know that you are long aggrieved. We know that your agony is nerve-wracking. Our hearts sigh with pain and sorrow. Our deepest, utmost desire is to see you free. The freedom that is your destiny, the freedom that is your freedom. Your resolve, your acute blistering wounds, your aspirations shall never ever go in vain. Those that tread you on the gates of hell, those that agonized, traumatized, brutalized you shall one day be bent in shame. Those that unleashed horrors on your sacred land shall redeem with their knees, bent in repentance. Your cry, your deepest wish for liberation will bear fruit one day, inshallah. The day of your resurrection is not far. Your yearnings for your lost glory, your magnificent dominion shall resuscitate on the beloved land of Kashmir. Your people, you epitomize your honor. Your heads shall stand in honoring every drop of blood, every single sigh, every single scream of terror shall, inshallah, be recompensed. The day is not far when your lush green valleys, your lakes, your mountains retain the exuberance of heavens. Kashmir, oh Kashmir, you are just very near to be back as the paradise gained. Kashmir, oh Kashmir, yes, your land shall resonate hope amidst hopelessness.
International Human Rights Day is a symbol of recognition of equal rights for all. UN adopted the International Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. This day reminds all nations to protect human rights and maintain human values. However, I would like to mention that way before the UN adopted the Declaration of Human Rights, Islam taught us to treat all humans equally, and Quran says that only the good deeds raise the status of one human over another. Today, among other nations, Pakistan also observes Human Rights Day and raises its voice against India's blatant human rights violations in occupied Jammu and Kashmir.
Thank you, Mr. Shujat, and thank you, Dr. Tessin, for this wonderful poem and putting these miseries and sacrifices of our Kashmiri brethren into the words. Now, I would like to invite the President of Center of Pakistan and International Relations, Ms. Amna Malik, to deliver her welcoming remarks. Her brief introduction is that she's the President of Center of Pakistan and International Relations, and she's a staunch advocate of human rights for the Kashmiri citizens. She's a promoter of the equal rights for all, especially the women empowerment, interfaith harmony, gender equality, and the global peace. She has been awarded by the President of Pakistan, Dr. Arif Alvi, and the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mahathir Mohamad, for her extraordinary efforts and contributions. Ms. Amna Malik, kindly take on the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uwais, and thank you very much, Tassin, for this all support. Why I choose this day, 10th of December? Because it is an International Human Rights Day, and it has its significant importance to highlight our global movement on human rights violation in Indian occupied Kashmir. And I'm thankful to Dr. Tassin and many of our friends who were already in our previous webinars, because we just wanted to make a group of like-minded people who should support this cause. So the topic of today's webinar is Kashmir under sanctity of UN Declaration of Human Rights. And we would like to highlight the challenges for the right of self-determination. And finally, we ask all the worthy speakers that please guide us that what should be the solution of this issue. I welcome all the distinguished speakers, and I again thank Dr. Tessin for always supporting this global movement. And I think we need advocacy on Kashmir issue, because Kashmiris are also humans, and on this Human Rights Day, we should highlight collectively that we should raise our voice through this webinar and through other forums. Uh, Today, our speakers are going to discuss the national and international perspective on the resolution of Kashmir deadlock, and also guide us that how to engage international community for breaking this silence and raise their voice for equal rights for Kashmiri people as well. And we should also raise our voice for the differential kind of treatment of the Indian hegemonic government, because it is not only threat to their domestic violence, but it is also a threat to a global peace. So I think we need to raise our voice through the international community, through media, through civil society and academia. So this is a part of the series of such webinars which we are conducting, and we are thankful to Mr. Wes and Shujat, who were in this year, they were throughout the year, they were supporting us. And now more team members are adding up in this movement. And we are thankful to Dr. Tessin, because you engage many eminent speakers who are providing us guidelines and also guiding us that how we highlight this issue and find out some amicable solution of this Kashmir dispute. So I request the speakers that please, at the end of your presentation, do give us some suggestions, and looking forward to work with you in the future as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President COPAIR. Now I would like to enlighten the participants and our worthy panelists about the format of our today's session. Each speaker will be given 15 minutes for their speeches, followed by the question answer session. Our first speaker for today's session is Dr. Tessin Nisar. She will also be the co-moderator of our today's session. A brief introduction of Dr. Tessin Nisar. She has a PhD from the Luis Guido Carli University, Rome. Dr. Nisar was awarded the PhD degree in political theory from the Center of Ethics and Global Politics, Faculty of Political Science, Luis University, Rome. Her topic of dissertation was the discourses on state and civil society in the context of colonial and post-colonial narratives, reconceptualizing the civil society in Pakistan. Dr. Nisar also obtained prestigious Erasmus Mundus degree in European integration and cultural studies from the globally renowned University of Uppsala in Sweden. Dr. Nisar collaborates and coordinates academic and scientific research focused on Pakistan with Italian and European universities, think tanks, and research organizations. She is also a part of Pakistan-specific research coordinator at the Archivo Disarmo Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies in Italy. In 2019, she served as the visiting and guest faculty at Ankara Yildirim Beyazıt University. She also represented the Pakistani Academic and Research Caucus in Italy and is a founding member of the Pakistanis in Italy, a forum that promotes cultural diplomacy through activities concerning the culture and tradition of Pakistan. Dr. Nisar has published and spoken extensively on topics including conflict and peace, war on terror, state and civil society in Pakistan, and especially the gender, minorities, and religions in South Asia. She is currently serving as coordinator research at Luis Guido Carli University, Rome, and she is a research fellow and a board of advisor at South Asia Democratic Forum, Brussels, Belgium. Welcome, Dr. Tassin. Today, she will be speaking on quintessential relevance of Kashmir within the debate on human rights. Over to you, Dr. Tassin.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Praise be to the Almighty, the most magnificent, the most benevolent. I would like to take this opportunity to offer my deepest gratitude and thanks to Ms. Amna Malik, as well as the team of the Center of International Relations, Center of Pakistan International Relations, Islamabad. And side by side, I would like to extend also my very profound gratitude to all the Italian participants who are here today to talk about a very important issue, the issue that needs a lot of cooperation and involvement of the international community. And it is really an honor to have all of you in this panel, and specifically for this webinar, which is focused on International Human Rights Day, and specifically focusing on the issue of Kashmir. So I would be categorically naming my most valued guests, Italian guests. I would like to start with thanking Professor Dr. Angelo Sant'Agostino, number one. Number two, I would like to offer my deepest thanks for having given us this opportunity for him to speak here in this platform, to Dr. Fabio Balsamo. Number three, I would like to also offer thanks to Domenico Melodoro, who was also one of my professor at the Luis Guido Carli University in Rome, Italy. And last but not the least, I would like to thank Ms. Barbara Gallo, who is my colleague at the Archivio Disarmo Institute of Research on Peace and Conflict Studies in Rome, Italy. So with that note, I welcome you all to our webinar, and I think that we must get started with the proceedings of our session. Thank you very much. So as all of you know, today's topic is focusing on the debate of human rights, and particularly the context of human rights violation in Kashmir. I think it will be very pertinent to discuss about the modus vivendi of how the rights debate has been focusing on the issue of Kashmir, and what is basically the discourse on this rights analysis. So in my presentation, which is focused on the theme as entitled, "The Quintessential Relevance of Kashmir Within the Debate on Human Rights," I would like to divide it into three parts. The first part will reflect upon the background, of course, the introduction to this debate. The second part will cover the discourse on rights. For example, the stance and the verdict given by rights organizations, as well as I would like to focus on the reports pertaining to Kashmir and also pertaining to the human rights violation of India. And the third part is basically the part of conclusion. So in order to get started with, I would like to read my presentation. I would like to start with the introduction. And I would like to say that when we talk about rights, or of their lack thereof, the first memory of our political consciousness reminds us of Israel's ambitions for extending its illegal territorial control of the Palestinian lands in West Jerusalem, Gaza, and West Bank, which has set a dangerous precedence without it being penalized, while turning entire majorities into minorities and undoing the legal and constitutional rights of populations unchecked without any international obligations. India, like Israel, follows the track of subverting the same rights for Kashmiris, depriving the rights to property, kinship, free assembly, jurisdiction over land by changing its demographic character. Recent times have shown a peculiar similarity between Israel and India as occupying powers over their own populations. Ever since it got elected, the Modi government has remained at the top gear against the suppression of minorities, and historically, the BJP's role in aggravating the Muslim-Hindu divide has been known to the world already. It has been exposed. Be it the Ram Janma Bhoomi temple, be it the Gujarat riots, cow slaughter, or the issue of love jihad, or for that matter, revocation of Article 370 and that of Article 35A of the Indian Constitution. The government of Narendra Modi has played a trump card and made its dice roll on such issues. Thus, it has factionalized and even communalized the Indian political entity. Moreover, provocation on enemy lines and the politics of hate against Pakistan is one of the single rallying points of the Modi government. It is thus very incumbent to address our topic, the quintessential relevance of Kashmir within the debate of human rights as a factor of India in clear breach of its own laws. India's abrogation of Article 370 and 35A in Kashmir also manifest a clear breach of its own constitution to that end. On 5th August 2019, India belligerently took over the disputed and autonomous region of Kashmir, stripping off its autonomy by merging it with the Union territory. The legal fraternity in India called it extra-constitutional, fraudulent, and illegal, barring the Jammu and Kashmir Assembly, rather making it entirely dysfunctional and abrogating it altogether. The adoption of the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, which is called as an extremely discriminatory citizenship law, and the aggressive suppression of the anti-CAA protests that followed, called the attention of the rights group vociferously. A little bit reflection to the Indian human rights record and the rights organizations. That is, what is the rights organization's response to the Indian violations of human rights? So according to Human Rights Watch 2019 report, Citizenship Amendment Act violates India's internal obligations to prevent deprivation of citizenship on the basis of race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin, as found in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and other human rights treaties that India has ratified. Within the context of current state of Indian atrocities in Kashmir, there should absolutely be no doubt that the wave of Indian belligerency and bellicosity has reached a dangerous dead end. It is yet obvious that Modi has chosen to advance the war hysteria and hate rhetoric against Pakistan as a single rallying point in his election campaigns. The fact is that communalism and hate politics in India seep deep today. The anti-Muslim and anti-minority sentiment has reached to a dangerous point in a country which was once ranked as the world's biggest democracy. The Indian intransigence and continued atrocities against the Kashmiri Muslims, depriving them of the right of self-determination, is a serious case in point, something that which India has vociferously denied even in international forums like the United Nations. The fact that it was India itself that went to the United Nations in the face of its defeat in Kashmir in 1947 is also well known. With the Kashmir issue having been internationalized, India continually denied the fact that it deployed thousands of its armed forces in the region and later imposed one of the most regressive acts, the AFSPA, to curtail the rights and freedom of the people of Kashmir. The United Nations convened its special session on Kashmir in more than 55 years. Antonio Guterres, who is the United Nations Secretary General, defended the right of self-determination of Kashmiris under the international law and promised that the right of self-determination of Kashmiris must be protected. He was the first Secretary General of the UN to, in fact, highlight the Kashmir issue freely. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNHCHR, Michelle Bachelet, also filed an application before India's Supreme Court asking the United Nations to be made a party in the petition that has been filed against the Citizenship Amendment Act. Now I would like to reflect a little bit about the reports of human rights as far as Indian case is concerned. What have been the objections and what have been the reactions in the international community based on this the kind of impetus, this human rights violation record that India has really been able to to be addressed. So of late, India has suffered the largest decline in its political rights and civil liberties. The 2020 report published by pro-democracy non-profit Freedom House, based in Washington, D.C., gives a damning assessment of the Modi government's pattern of Hindu nationalist policies, including the persecution of religious minorities, abruptly revoking Jammu and Kashmir's autonomy. In the 2017 World Freedom Index, India sank 3 places to position 136th, least free. The 2017 India Freedom Report, published in May by media watchdog, The Hoot, which spoke of an overall sense of shrinking liberty, not experienced in recent years. It counted 54 reported attacks on journalists, at least 3 cases of television news channels being banned, 45 internet shutdowns, and 45 sedition cases against individuals and groups between January 2016 and April 2017. Similarly, a report published by PEN International on the issue of pursuing truth in the face of intolerance outlined dissenting views by journalists, writers, academicians, or students in India that faced intimidation, harassment, prosecution, online abuse, and even physical violence. The report illustrated the varied ways in which critical voices are targeted and silenced. It highlighted the rising trend in directed attacks online and offline, the systemic stifling of academic research and freedom, and the continued marginalization of and hostility towards women's voices. The report also added that laws that stifle speech and environment hostile to dissenting views and emboldened critics online and in the real world have cast a chill over free expression in India. Journalists and writers have been sued, intimidated, threatened, and sometimes even murdered. There is little political will to amend the laws that prevent free expression or to enforce laws that protect the writers. A popular blog site, for example, called Scroll, quoted a research on the impact factor of dissent on its democratic downslide. It offers a detailed quantitative study of democracy around the world, which has confirmed some of those fears. The most populous democracy in the world, so-called populist, India is at risk. The report released on May 28 was compiled by Varieties of Democracy, a team of more than 2,500 social sciences experts headquartered at the Department of Political Science at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. India ranks 81st among the world's countries on the Liberal Democracy Index. And in the South Asian context, Sri Lanka and Nepal even rank higher than India. Moreover, India has seen a significant fall compared to its historic score ever since Modi government came to power in 2014. The report also notes the shrinking space for civil society in India, stating that the government increasingly restricts the entry and exit of civil society organizations by using a law on foreign funding for NGOs, the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act. As of 2017, 20,000 CSOs, mainly working on human rights and environmental issues, have lost their licenses. After that, only 13,000 CSOs remain to continue working unconstrained. 3 UN special rapporteurs have urged Prime Minister Modi to repeal the FCRA, claiming it is progressively used more to silence organizations involved in advocating civil, political, economic, social, environmental, or cultural priorities, which may differ from those backed by the government. As a result, the country's civil society participation index has fallen significantly since 2011, registering its biggest decline in 2015, the year after Modi came to power. According to Al Jazeera, the year 2016 saw 29 internet shutdowns compared to 15 in 2015. Many of these were instituted in Kashmir, where mobile internet services were suspended from July 9th after Burhan Wani, the 22-year-old commander of the Kashmiri separatist Hizbul Mujahideen group, who was killed by the Indian security forces. In October 2016, the Kashmir Reader, a prominent English language newspaper, was asked to stop publication for no apparent reason. There are severe curbs on freedom, and free expression has downslided to a record low. India has witnessed a rising tide of violence, impunity extending pre-trial detentions, and has witnessed a kind of violence which is perpetrated by the Modi government, which is really unprecedented in the recent years. While public opinion to the Modi government's policies in Kashmir has been silenced in India, many deem that it has played havoc with the credibility of its own institutions. In April 2019, I was a participant in a conference organized by Reset Dialogue on Civilizations in Venice, Italy, and asked a question to a very eminent social right activist and a senior professor of Jamia Millia Islamia University in New Delhi, Ananya Vajpayee. Upon my question on how does the Indian civil society react to the legislation by the Indian Supreme Court on the issue of construction of Ram Janmabhoomi Mandir on the Babri Mosque, do you think there is a counter narrative and a concrete as well as organized reaction against the decision at the institutional level? Her reply was revealing. She replied, I feared that there was hardly any adverse reaction to all the judgments the Supreme Court had passed regarding the Ram Janmabhoomi case. Between the very dire situation in Kashmir and the unrest surrounding the Citizenship Amendment Act last year in November, this otherwise historic verdict went by almost completely unnoticed and without the kind of pushback it ought to have received. Yet, the reason is the rise of the right-wing majoritarian Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party, which has been in power in India since May 2014 for the last 6 years now under the leadership of Narendra Modi. The BJP has the backing of RSS, a fascist organization which seeks to redefine the secular Indian Republic as a Hindu Rashtra or Hindu nation, or for that matter, a Hindu Reich. In this vision of India, it is very important to listen. In this vision of India, Muslims would be second-class citizens at best. Discrimination and violence against Muslims have risen sharply in the past decade, but especially in the past 5 years, from lynching to riots, from parliamentary legislation to political rhetoric, the condition of minorities has continually deteriorated in the Modi regime. Most recent mention of Kashmiri human rights violation on an international platform. I would like to refer to the most recent resolution in the light of the Indian human rights violation in Kashmir as adopted by the 47th session of Organization of Islamic Conference Foreign Ministerial Meeting in Niger. The resolution condemned the state-sponsored terrorism and crimes against humanity by the Indian forces against Kashmiri people. It denounced extrajudicial killings against fake encounters, search and cordon off operations, and demolition of houses and private property as a form of collective punishment. The resolution also criticized the use of pellet guns used against innocent children, young and elderly people in Kashmir by the Indian forces, along with the harassment of the Kashmiri women, deploring India of exploiting the COVID-19 situation to intensify and advance its unlawful occupation. Furthermore, India was asked to its international human rights obligation and allow the OIC special rapporteurs on J&K, that is Jammu and Kashmir, and OIC fact-finding mission to visit occupied Kashmir and implement recommendations of 2 reports of the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights on Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Pardon. The most important aspect of the resolution has been that the OIC has asked the international community to review its engagement. To review its engagement to India as it was violating and disregarding the international law, the international humanitarian law, and international resolutions. And now the third part, which is the conclusion. In a major diplomatic win for Pakistan, the OIC conference in Niger held recently unanimously supported the Kashmir cause. The OIC unanimously adopted a Pakistan-sponsored resolution which categorically rejected illegal and unilateral actions taken by India on 5th of August last year to change the status of Kashmir. It asked India to cancel domicile certificates to non-Kashmiris as well as other illegal actions. The 57-member group also asked India to refrain from altering demographic structure of the territory. It also condemned the human rights violation by India in Indian-held Kashmir in strongest possible terms. Pakistan has recently issued a dossier to the United Nations marking proof of India's nefarious designs in destabilizing Balochistan, Gilgit-Baltistan, Sindh, and other parts for Indian involvement in its evil intentions. It has proved detailed evidences of the APS massacres, insurgency in Balochistan, instigating terrorism and acts of violence across Pakistan, and India's clear support to terrorist infrastructure and organizations which it has used as its proxies in Pakistan. India has fallen to deaf ears over questions of brutal killings and cold-blooded murder of Kashmiris in broad daylight. The truth is, however, speaking against itself, as many Kashmiris now clearly denounce and have no fear of exposing India's brutality and brinkmanship. Mehbooba Mufti, former People's Democratic Party's chief and the chief minister of Jammu and Kashmir, recently said that she will no longer raise the Indian flag unless Jammu and Kashmir flag and constitution be restored. Umar Abdullah, an eminent Kashmiri politician and also ex-chief minister and National Conference leader of Jammu and Kashmir, has also stood against the Indian government and has recently said that Indian Supreme Court has surrendered its independence and takes decisions from the government. Earlier, Farooq Abdullah, the chief of National Conference, had urged the Chinese to restore Article 370, which were considered seditious by the BJP. India has suffered huge losses from its conventional geostrategic superiorities in areas adjacent to Kashmir. China now dominates. China gave a real rebuff to India as a response to its unilateral moves in J&K. In a new geopolitical reality, India's imminent failures of choosing might against right seems to shatter its own dreams of being supreme actor in the region. Short of its legitimacy, both domestically and internationally, the Modi government is in troubled waters, as mainstream international media has for the first time reacted to the Kashmir issue in a non-conventional manner. New York Times and Washington Post have written opinion ads in critical tone on India's stance and moves in Jammu and Kashmir. China, as a third actor in the region, has clearly proved that India can no longer have its sway in Aksai Chin. India-Iran plan on construction of Shah Bahar port as an answer to China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, has been scrapped. There is a huge domestic outburst against the Modi government as regards the matter of demonetization and recent farmers' protests on government's unfulfilled promises failing to deliver across many spectrums. India is coping a bad COVID-19 emergency situation, which has exacerbated huge strains on its economy. In the current context, thus, the BJP has been facing the brunt of its own making, and only time will tell how it is able to cope with domestic and international pressure in a tactful manner. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tessin. I really like your presentation, and you highlighted the domestic issues in India, and also you mentioned about, so do you think that there is a big number of people who would like to, disagree with their government, like the civil society of India, and also their political parties like Congress? And there must be many eminent media persons who are also, against their own government policies. So what do you think if we engage them, and how do you think? Because, I don't think so that everybody in India is having the same kind of mindset, and they are favoring their government, because India itself is having their poverty issue, and you also mentioned about the COVID emergency issues. So what is your opinion regarding this? And you also highlighted a few of your interactions with the Indian civil society.
Yes, I think it's a very pertinent question. Amna, thank you very much for the question. I think I look at it from two perspectives. The first is basically what is happening inside India and the notion of the narrative which is developing against Narendra Modi. And the second perspective is the Indian diasporic community living outside of India. There are two different ways of looking at it. Now, what is happening is the Indian diasporic community outside. First, I will start with that. There are like number of people I know wherever I travel internationally. I have been able to really observe and really been able to talk to people, the students community, the scholars, who are very much against the Modi government, but yet it is very difficult for them to sort of involve themselves in the domestic arena, because they are afraid that what if they are incarcerated. So there is always this kind of a sword hanging, because somehow or the other they have to return to the country, if not now, some other time, and they are not sure till when is the Modi government going to remain. So these are like the fears that are felt also by the diasporic Indian community. Now, coming to the Indian masses in general, yes, there is a deep agitation. And you have to consider the fact that Indian civil society is a civil society that has really like protested on streets. I mean, if you have just witnessed what had been going on in November and December of 2019, you will be witness to many facts, such as the protest of the students of Jamia Millia University, which I quoted in my paper. And also the protests and demonstrations by the JNU Students Association and all the Muslim youth associations, which have been able to mobilize their support to anti-CAA movement. So there is a comprehensive support war for against the Modi government, and they are in a position. I'm not sure that it's going to be institutionalized, because what I mentioned in my paper is that it has also factionalized and communalized India to a dead end. And I'm really like also very surprised how the people have been silenced in India. I mean, considering the fact that it's such a big democracy, and how democracies can be able to silence its own population. So I think it's a big question mark with a big dot, that how far the international community can actually remain mum and not raise questions of revocation of Articles 370 and 35A, as well as what today goes on in the streets of India with regards to the farmers' movements, with regards to the protests of the Citizenship Amendment Act, And the way the Indian Supreme Court is justifying all that is, done by the Modi government, it's shameless. And I think that it doesn't has any parallel in history. In order to conclude to what you had asked me, I think that these are very troubled times for democracies worldwide. You look at the United States, you look at India, you look at some European democracies suffering the might of the far right. So what is the solution? Only time will tell. And I think that I've said it the way it had to be. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tessin. Anybody else is having any question, or we should move ahead to the next speaker? Dr. Tessin, you can continue.
Yes, I think that we should continue on with the presentation of Dr. Domenico Meledoro. Dr. Meledoro has been my teacher at the Luis Guido Carli University in Rome. And currently he's serving in the capacity of a senior researcher at observatory called Ethos at the Lewis Business School based in Rome, Italy. Dr. Meledoro works on contemporary political theory, multiculturalism, liberalism, disability studies as well. His most recent book is Dealing with Diversity, a study in contemporary liberalism, published by the Oxford University Press in the current year, 2020. I would like to give the floor to Professor Dr. Meledoro.
So thank you everybody, especially to the organizer for inviting me to this very important discussion on such delicate issue. Today is an important day concerning human rights, so my talk will address the issue of human rights in relation with minority rights. I did a lot of academic work on multiculturalism and minority rights, and I had a special concern with regard to the compatibility between human rights from one side and minority rights from the other. In fact, at the first sight, you could say that there is a sort of inconsistency between human rights and minority rights. This inconsistency can be seen from a theoretical and historical point of view. People who are in favor of this inconsistency between human rights and minority rights could say from the historical point of view that the so-called revolution of human rights came after the Second World War. So the human rights have a universalistic orientation, and from the other side, the minority rights seem to have like a more particularistic and contextualistic inspiration. So this is why people say that there is inconsistency. Also in the more recent debate, there are many theorists who are against the compatibility between human rights and minority rights. For instance, you can think about the well-known debate on women's rights and multiculturalism. More or less 20 years ago, there was a huge debate, especially in US universities, about the so-called issue, is multiculturalism bad for women? The idea, according to some theorists, is that if you recognize specific identities, if you give recognition and autonomy to ethnic and religious groups, in general, there are some categories which will be violated, especially women, because in general, the idea of these theorists was that the groups asking for autonomy in general are groups which are very conservative. And in a conservative group, in general, men have the power, so when they have autonomy, they can violate the rights and the equality of women in this case. However, I now I have no time to argue completely for this position. I don't think that this way of putting the issue is right, because I would prefer a different narrative. And according to this narrative, the acknowledgement of minority rights and of autonomy to groups should be seen in consistency with human rights. Especially, to be more precise, I would prefer to argue in favor of a narrative which understands human rights as inspiration and constraint of minority rights. Then I will explain what I mean by inspiration and constraint. Before explaining these points, I would try to synthesize what a struggle for a multicultural state means. I argue that when there is a struggle for a multicultural state, we can distinguish 3 points. Firstly, the idea of a multicultural state implies the repudiation of the idea of a unitary state. In general, especially we in Europe, are used to think traditionally as to the state as the possession of the majority. So the classical idea of nation state says that the state belongs to the majority. And when there is a struggle for multicultural state, this idea is put aside, because the multicultural state implies that the state and institutions are not only the possession of the majority, but minorities should be recognized and somehow accommodated. The second point of the struggle for a multicultural state says that the process of nation building is not a natural event. So when a nation is created, this is not a natural series of events. The state creates itself through some specific policies. Think, for instance, to the way in which a state is unified thanks to the recognition of a unique national language. So this means that the creation of a nation is not natural. It is a political action, and when there is multiculturalism, the nation building is not an exclusive process. So it means that minorities should be recognized, accommodated within this process of nation building. The third point of a multicultural state is the recognition of historic injustice. So, for instance, when there is the recognition of multicultural rights, of multicultural institution, the majority state acknowledge that there have been historic injustice, and there is some form of reparation. Of course, as you can guess, I'm arguing from a liberal democratic point of view. And if we argue from a liberal democratic point of view, from a liberal egalitarian point of view, we can say that there are 3 main features of a liberal multicultural state. Firstly, in a liberal multicultural state, there are different rights for different minorities. The first difference is between old and new minorities. Old minorities, we can say that are the, let's say, the indigenous group, for instance. New minorities, as you can guess, are the immigrants. So in a liberal multicultural state, there is the recognition of rights according the difference of minorities. What the symbolic, what multiculturalism is about, we can say here that multicultural recognition concern both the symbolic aspect and the practical aspect. Multiculturalism is not only about symbolic recognition, it is only about the redistribution of power, resources, and opportunity. So we have to say that from one side, multiculturalism is about the recognition of minorities, of their dignity, of their rights, but also it is about the redistribution of power. This means that you cannot divide the symbolic dimension from the more concrete dimension having to do with power, resources, and opportunity. And the third and finally, I think is the most important feature of a liberal multicultural state is that the process of nation building is not cancelled, it is pluralized. So when there is the recognition of a plurality of culture, of people, of ethnic belongings, of different religious inspiration, this means that the process of nation building is not cancelled at all. It is pluralized. So it means that these different identities are recognized, somehow accommodated within the bigger nations. So here I'm going towards my conclusion. I want to try to explain what I mean by the motto, human rights as both inspiration and constraint of minority rights. When I say that human rights are consistent with minority rights, this means that human rights and minority rights come from the same source. That is the basic idea of human equality and freedom. So we should not separate these two ideas of rights, because when we recognize the dignity of minorities, when we say that minorities should not be assimilated to the main nation, we are recognizing that people belonging to minorities are in some fundamental sense equal to other people. So this means that the basic idea of human rights is also the inspiration of minority rights. In a sense, we recognize that people belonging to minorities should not be violated in their integrity, because we recognize that they are human beings equal to each other. And the second point, human rights as a constraint, is also important to understand, because when we say that human rights work as a constraint of multiculturalism and of minority rights, we are looking at the issue of minorities within minorities. It's a famous issue in political discussion. So when you recognize rights, autonomy to a certain ethnic or religious group, you should be careful, because within this group itself, there are minorities. So if the inspiration of the minority rights is human rights, is the belief in the human equality, you should not violate human rights within the groups. This is not, of course, like a simple issue, as you can guess, because all these problems are very complex. So but still we have to think, especially in this important day, especially within the issue you are discussing about Kashmir violation of human rights. So we should try to think that we have to compose in a unitarian and consistent framework our thought about minorities and groups. So thank you. I hope I was clear enough. So I hope that there is also the opportunity to discuss with you if you have questions and comments. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Domenico Meledoro. I have a question for you, and the question is that can one really connect multiculturalism and diversity with human rights? I mean, if one is a parcel of another, how could you actually distinguish multiculturalism and diversity with human rights? So, yeah.
Kindly unmute. Kindly unmute your.
Yes,
yeah,
sure. I always do the same mistake. So thanks for the question. When I say that I want to try to connect minority rights to human rights, I'm focusing upon the same inspiration. So in a sense, when you recognize that people have human rights, have dignity, of course, you are recognizing that they are, in a sense, equal. They are human beings, and so all the human beings should enjoy the same rights. When you see people as a part of the community, and so as belonging to some minority community, and this community could be violated in their integrity. This community can suffer from inequality, from different disadvantage. You're looking always at the same person, but as part of a group. But still, it's not important how the person is seen. The important is why you recognize right to these people. You recognize rights to these people because they are equal, and so they suffer from some disadvantage. So I can recognize you, especially should be more careful to recognize the rights to people belonging to minorities because they can suffer from disadvantages, and these disadvantages are not something they are responsible for. For instance, if you belong to a religious minority community within, let's say, a Catholic state, you suffer from some disadvantages, and these disadvantages are not related to your personal responsibility because this is your religious orientation which gives you some status. So this is why human rights and minority rights come from the same source, which according to me is the belief in human equality.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your insightful views on the link between multiculturalism and diversity as well as human rights. And now, just a
Dr.
second.
Tessin, there is a question. There is another question. Wes, please speak up.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Domenico, for your intellectual insight into the subject. I want to ask that it is for sure that the promotion and protection of the minorities help to prevent or resolve a conflict. And effective participation of minorities in the public life, in the public sphere, is an essential component of any democracy. But as we see that India brags itself as the world's largest democracy, but in the background of the Kashmir, in the context of the Kashmir, the Kashmiri minorities, which is predominantly a Muslim majority region, India is not granting them their right to participate in the public life. So what should be the way out here, and what should be the role of multilateral institutions of the supranational bodies to play in this context, in the context of Kashmir?
Of course, as you said, I agree with you that an authentic democracy recognizes the importance of minorities. So, since, as I said, the idea of multiculturalism goes beyond the idea that the state belongs to the majority group. Of course, any violation of human rights, any violation of the basic equality of individuals and group is against democracy. So if we say that a certain group within a nation is denied the equal voice, this means that there is a problem of democracy. I see that your point. I agree with you that it is a problem of democracy, especially for countries self-defining themselves as democracy. So I agree with you. But there is also a further point. A proper democracy, according to me, according to what I think is the proper understanding of liberal democracy, should recognize that people and groups participate to the public spheres according to what they think is the proper way. So there is no unique way of being citizens. That's why I said that a proper liberal multicultural democracy is a plural democracy, because not only you as a minority should be free to have your voice, to live in a democracy, also according to your values. So democracy should not be like a homogenizing force, should recognize the plurality of people, and also admit that there are different ways of being citizens. So there are citizens in a one form and citizens in different form. About the second part of the question, I'm not so confident in giving you an answer, because it depends on you were mentioning the role of the international community. Of course, the international community can intervene, but it depends on how gross is the violation of human rights. Because as you know, the democracies have a certain degree of autonomy within their borders. But of course, the nation state cannot do whatever it wants, the citizens, because as we know, since we are talking about human rights, there are certain things that states cannot do to citizens. So the idea of the state as an entity which can do whatever it wants to citizens and the international community should be silent is not anymore valid if we accept the idea of human rights. So if there are gross violations of human rights, the state, in a sense, should be constrained to act according to human rights.
Thank you. There is a question from Vikas Hussain Shah. Where can you speak out, because he's constantly sending. He's one of the panelists.
Yeah, we have a question from the attendee. It's the Vikas Hussain Shah. He's a PhD scholar from IR Department, University of Peshawar. He asked that, how do you think the diversity of culture in India is linked to ethnic plus class difference? How do you think that India can ever claim they are taking this same human rights if there's a big class difference of the Brahman and Shudras and it is not removed? And are Indians more concerned about the class difference than the problem of
minorities? Are Indians more concerned about class difference than minorities? You know, I'm a European. In Europe, we are used to see, at least from that India is like a country in which there is a coexistence of different people and groups. Of course, this is not the dominant view nowadays, because as you know better than me, the political situation in India is not so simple to understand in terms of diversity. So there is also problems of acceptance of this diversity, as the recent events tell us. But still, I would say that you know, the difference, we should try not to see as in opposition the request of recognition of diversity and the economic matters, because as I said, the two questions are somehow related. A proper theory of justice should try to give an answer to symbolic and economic disadvantage. Somehow they are related, somehow they are, it is possible to see them in isolation. So I don't see that there is an opposition in principle between a state that recognizes cultural diversity and a state that tries to face economic disequality. They are different issues, but the state should try to focus upon all the sources of disadvantage, because, as I said, the inspiration of a democracy is the belief in equality.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Yes, Dr. Tessin, please go ahead.
Yes, so thank you once again, Domenico, for your detailed answers to the questions put forward. And now I think I would like to take the opportunity to invite our third speaker for the session, and that is Dr. Fabio Balsamo. A little introduction of Dr. Balsamo is that Dr. Balsamo, after graduating with honors in law, obtained in 2013 the title of PhD in ecclesiastical law at the Federico II University of Naples. A lawyer since 2013, he was a research fellow in ecclesiastical and canon law at the Department of Political and Social Sciences at the University of Calabria, Italy, in the year 2015-2016. Dr. Balsamo has also been a speaker at national and international conferences. He is the author of numerous publications and articles, specifically on religion and law, freedom and interreligious dialogue, and the legal status of religious minorities. Dr. Balsamo has also been a research fellow at the University of Calabria, as mentioned, and he wrote a monograph, Le normative croniche antimafia, in Italian, which is translated in English as The Normative Chronicles of the Anti-Mafia. He has several other publications on the subject and specifically focused on relations between state and religions. So, Dr. Fabio Balsamo, I would like to give the floor to you. Welcome.
Welcome. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Tessin Nizar and the President of the Center of Pakistan International Relations, Ms. Hannah Malik, for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to reflect on a subject so rich in implication, such as the legal status of religious minorities in contemporary societies, and in particular on the condition of Islamic communities in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I also greet all the authoritative colleagues and speakers. Today's debate takes on even more interest in consideration of the 72nd anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, still not adequately applied by many signatory states. The experience of what is happening to the detriment of the Islamic communities of Kashmir is in fact only one, even if striking, of the demonstrations. The United Nations Declaration imposed the need to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms, but did not go beyond their generic affirmation on a mainly individual level. In this sense, the declaration shared the same approach of other Western declarations on human rights, and in particular the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen promulgated in France in 1789 and 1793, and the American Declaration of Independence of 1776. In all these historical antecedents, albeit with different shades, the existence of human rights was affirmed as concretely guaranteed within a specific state model, antithetical to tyranny, despotism, and oppression. Similarly, the Declaration was proclaimed to reaffirm the inalienability of the rights of every individual in the face of the barbarism and horrors of the Second World War. This purpose deprived the Declaration of its juridical immediacy, giving it rather a character of moral commitment which could at most inspire national legislation, without, however, being assisted by any judicial effectiveness. Consequently, the declaration based on the centrality of the relationship between the individual and the state authority, although it seems evident today that, on the contrary, human rights are prior to the state legal systems, as underlined with regard to the right to religious freedom by the best Italian ecclesiastical doctrine, according to which the juridical organization of society is certainly subsequent to the rising of the religious problems, and that the religious aspects, at least in their noumenal dimension, are certainly prior to politics. It's understandable, therefore, that the acceptance of such an approach is reflected in the fact that the United Nations Declaration does not pay attention to the issue of minorities and to the affirmation of some rights, including the right to the self-determination of peoples. Also, the Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, adopted by the Council of Europe in 1950, uses the term minority on one occasion, and with the restricted meaning of national minority, without making any reference to the principle of self-determination of peoples. In fact, all these international conventions subtend a Western vision of the relationship between public power and communities, completely incompatible with the affirmation of a right of a single community to its own self-determination. We have to remember that on the historical level in the Western world, the management of multi-religiousness determined by the end of Christian unity after the Protestant schism and by the failure of the European project of Res Publica Christiana, has been entrusted to the political principle of tolerance as instrumentum regni. In fact, after the birth of the first formal national states and with the overcoming of the principle cuius regio eius religio, the principle of tolerance has guaranteed in Europe a relatively peaceful coexistence of several religious communities within a state legal system. Suffice is to say that even the Albertine Statute of 1848, which was the constitution of the Kingdom of Italy until the Republican Constitution came into force, provided for in Article 1 that non-Catholic cults were simply tolerated in accordance with the laws. In other words, only recently in Western democratic systems do new problems of a socio-political and juridical nature deriving from migratory phenomena and from the multicultural and multireligious nature of contemporary societies have prompted a transformation of the principle of tolerance from a political principle in a juridical principle, which is concretized today in the affirmation and recognition of a real right to difference. These considerations mark the distance that exists between the traditional Western model of relations between public authorities and religious communities with respect to the Eastern and more precisely Islamic vision of these systems or relations. Differences that motivated, it must be remembered, the refusal of some Islamic countries to sign the United Nations Declaration in 1948 on the basis of the failure to provide for the right of self-determination of peoples and the affirmation of a conception of the right to religious freedom in which the profiles of religious proselytes were too much accentuated in line with colonial ideologies. On the other hand, classical Islamic thought is based on an ontological, pluralistic conception of the ideal model of the Muslim state as a political social aggregate characterized by the protection of specific religious freedoms, in which those groups that in Western vision would not hesitate to define even in a pejorative sense minorities, in the Islamic context become in effect protected communities thanks to the dhimma, that is the protection pact signed between Ummah Islamiyah and non-Muslims, which provides for the recognition of confessional freedom and juridical autonomy. The federative constitutional model outlined in the Charter of Medina is therefore the archetype aimed at guaranteeing the political unity of the Islamic community, and unifying a element is identified precisely in the fundamental and founding principle of freedom and confessional autonomy of non-Muslim communities, the so-called Halal Kitab. It's no coincidence that only with the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights of 1966, to the drafting of which the Islamic countries have also concretely contributed, that can we seek greater attention for the right to the self-determination of peoples, explicitly stated in Articles 1 and 3. Although these pacts still share the typically Western individualistic perspective of the religious dimension, Article 27 finally opened to an effective acknowledgement of the community dimension of religion, precisely with regard to the recognition of the cultural identity of religious minorities. This statement is subsequently taken up in other Islamic declarations on human rights and has been reiterated in Articles 25 and 43 of the Arab Charter on Human Rights. Recently, the protection of the identity of minorities was further enhanced by the Declaration of Marrakesh, in which, on the basis of the recovery of the original Islamic State archetype indicated by the Medina Charter, it was hoped for the development of a concept of citizenship inclusive of the various religious and cultural groups, in respect of which it's necessary to ensure the full protection of rights and of freedoms. Although the 1966 international pacts explicitly state the obligation of signatory states to guarantee members of minorities the full exercise of their cultural, religious, and linguistic rights, the vulnerability of religious minorities is still a factual finding today. And organization, and for various reasons, we have to underline that minorities are still exposed to attacks from the state and from various private entities and organizations involved for various reasons in the conflicts that blooded many countries. The technological development of contemporary societies has not, in fact, determined any overall improvement in the condition of minorities, which, on the contrary, may be subject, compared to the past, to further new forms of discrimination and persecution, also in consideration of the dependence on modern digital technologies for the concrete exercise of fundamental rights, including the right to access information and, in time of pandemic, also the right to religious freedom too. Even for this reason, beyond the regional system of protection of human rights, the legal instruments that are available to the international community for the protection of minority rights are still not enough to protect minorities. And, as is well known, there are essentially two. The first tool is represented by the prosecution before the International Criminal Court of the crime of genocide, an operation, however, not without difficulties due to the limits imposed by the same criminal case. Fewer obstacles are encountered instead with the reference to the crime of persecution, which is most recently defined by Article 7 of the Statute of the International Criminal Court, consists in the international and severe deprivation of fundamental rights contrary to the international law and committed by reason of identity of a particular group or community. It's a very flexible criminal figure, which allow to sanction, also thanks to the most recent jurisprudential evolution, rather heterogeneous conducts aimed at hitting a specific community or collectivity, also through non-violent or coercive means, but capable of producing which effect a serious diminutio in the enjoyment of fundamental rights. Through this case, it's therefore also possible to repress simply discriminatory conduct, such as the limitation of access to work by group members, as well as restriction in economical or judicial field. In fact, for the purposes of the configurability of the crime, is crucial above all the criterion of identifiability of the religious group as the effective target of violent, liberal killing or discriminatory measures. This construction has the further advantage of allowing both government restrictions and acts of hostility systematically perpetuated by private groups and organizations against particular communities to be contemplated as persecutory conducts. From a legal point of view, therefore, the most recent doctrinal and jurisprudential evolution of the crime of religious persecution therefore allows us to believe that the government restriction and the phenomena of intolerance perpetrated to the detriment of communities settled in Kashmir and Jammu are abstractly framed in the crime of persecution. Moreover, these abuses were made possible through the prior modification of the Indian constitution and the subsequent adoption of various measures directed to repress the expression of all forms of dissent, including the closure of the internet and telephone networks, as well as the arbitrary detention of journalists, activists, and politicians. The situation has further worsened in the last year. In fact, the COVID-19 pandemic representing the propitious opportunity to justify the adoption of further undue government restriction of minorities, and in particular on the Islamic communities of Kashmir and Jammu. Suffices to say that in addition to all the other serious restrictions already imposed by the Indian government, the only mobile network available in Kashmir at the moment in the midst of a pandemic is the 2G network. In conclusion, the persecution suffered by the Kashmiri, both in the form of government restriction of fundamental freedoms, including freedom of religion and communication, and in the form of violent episodes of deprivation of personal freedom, could certainly integrate, especially if further perpetuated over time, a gross or blatant denial on discriminatory grounds of fundamental rights, laid down in the international customary of treaty law, reaching the same level of gravity as the other crimes against humanity, with the consequence of being prosecuted under international criminal law as the persecution of a minority. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fabio. And I just want to greet our two advisors of Center of Pakistan and International Relations, Honorable Ambassador Khalid Mahmood Saab, he just joined us, and also Khalid Latif Saab. So I asked our advisors, Khalid Mahmood Saab or Khalid Latif Saab, if you have any question, or then we move to our next speakers. Khalid Mahmood Saab, Ambassador Khalid, kindly unmute.
No question as yet. Thank you.
Okay, okay, thank you, thank you. Yes, Dr. Tessie?
Yes, I would like to thank Dr. Fabio Balsamo for his very wonderful presentation. And I have a question for Dr. Fabio. And the question is that, in your opinion, what could be the root of coherence in religious practices with human rights practice?
Thank you, Dr. Tessin, for the interesting question. We have to start from a statement. Religious rules are not only religious rules, because religious rules constitute a state, not state, but a legal system. And religious rules have to dialogue with secular law. In other words, I think that the root of coherence in religious practice with human rights practice can be individuated in the rule of interpretation. In fact, religious rules are legal rules, and so they are the result of the interpretation of the Holy Scriptures, of the Holy Texts. I think that a correct and non-fundamentalistic interpretation of the Holy Text is the root of coherence in religious practice with human rights practice. In other terms, I think that the religious rules, and particularly, especially the rules of the three great monotheistic religions, affirm important values, the values of fraternity, the values of respect for diversity, the values of brotherhood, the values of protection of nature and natural ecosystems, the values of solidarity towards poor and towards the future generation. For example, in this sense, it's really important to underline the Charter of the New Alliance of Virtue signed in Abu Dhabi last December, where it was stated that religious freedom belongs to the ontological status of human being. So I think that religion can be a vehicle to favor, to improve the exercise of human rights on a global scale. It's important in this sense, a valorization of interreligious dialogue and a dialogue between secular and confessional law, because secular law must guarantee to each individual and to each group the right to express itself and the right to express their belonging to a confession, to a religion, without limitations. And so I think that the role of religion in promoting the human rights is really important and must be valorized more than now.
Okay, thank you. But I have another query to how you responded. So you think that if the states fail to resolve all sorts of matters, bilateral, diplomatic, or any other, political matters, do you think that any other platform, religious or irreligious, non-religious, or for that matter, any other track could be really helpful in this? Because in case of India and Pakistan, frankly speaking, nothing has really worked when it comes to dialogue. Even if dialogue has been a very important fact to consider when it comes to the resolution of issues and specifically conflict, huge conflict that surfaces. So in your opinion, what is the significance of non-traditional ways of incorporating dialogue, which can really work in one case and which cannot work in the other case? How do you really address the human rights issue with this debate?
All right. Yeah, we have to say that in Western legal system we have a distinction between religious rule and secular rules, but now we are studying in most recent works the role of religious diplomacy in the promotion of values of brotherhood and in the aims to reduce injustice and also violation of rights. In the Euro-Mediterranean area, we are experimented in relation with migratory phenomena, the importance of the interreligious dialogue that can supply to the rule of the state. So I think that religions can constitute an important factor to supply the deficits of status of state legal system. In other words, I think that interreligious dialogue can promote an improvement of the exercise of human rights in each place. It's only important that politics can recognize the rule of religions in the society. This is my opinion.
Okay, all right. I think that you're much clear about it, but I think that in case of India and Pakistan particularly, religious factor cannot be like politically pursued. It could be otherwise, like on the cultural grounds, perhaps. It could be a kind of, cultural interaction or something like that. So thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you.
So Amna, are there any other questions or in the forum?
I think let's move ahead and we can then later ask.
Okay,
let's move on to the next speaker, please.
All right. So I think our next panelist, I think Amna, you can be able to be better, in a position to introduce Syed Mahmood Kazmi. Perhaps you have more of a detail regarding Mr. Syed Mahmood Kazmi. So I would like you to introduce him because he's the next speaker.
I think Wes should be online. Wes, kindly.
Our next worthy speaker is Syed Mahmood Kazmi. Today he will be speaking on children's right to education, which is disrupted by the Indian occupation in Kashmir. A brief introduction about Mr. Kazmi. He is the Global Youth Ambassador for the United Nations Education Campaign and an advocate of the UN Sustainable Development Goals with a focus on education, gender equality, climate action, and peace. Mr. Kazmi has more than 10 years of rich experience of working in international humanitarian and non-governmental organizations. And Mr. Kazmi has earned the master's degree in sociology and master's of advanced studies in peace and conflict transformation from University of Basel, Switzerland. So over to you, Mr. Kazmi.
Hello, everyone. A very good morning to all of you. My name is Syed Mahmood Kazmi. And first of all, I am from Kashmir, and this event fulfills my heart with joy that everyone is gathered on the topic of Kashmir. Today is a Human Rights Day, so I cannot wish everyone a Human Rights Day because a lot of us are suffering on their rights to liberty, to life, to, so many other things. Their rights are taken. So I was given this topic to discuss the plight of Kashmiri children who are the supreme effectees in the deadly conflict between Pakistan and India since 1947. The main issues children are facing in the region currently are violence and lack of education. Boys have been abducted during midnight raids by the security forces, and girls and women have been molested during the nighttime raids by the officers of Indian tyrannical forces. The situation of children in occupied valley of Kashmir is seriously grim. According to the fact-finding mission, which spent 5 days in the occupied valley, around 13,000 boys were picked up from their homes in the middle of night, from their beds, and were being held indefinitely, illegally, either in the army camps or in the police stations during the lockdown after the abrogation of Article 370. So there's a systematic oppression for depriving Kashmiri people, not just for the right to education, to life, to liberty to choose, but also depriving them on the lack of food, the basic food like milk and basic needs throughout the population. This has a quite negative effects on the children who are still growing, the infants, the toddlers, in the need of proper resources for their growth. The Indian tyrannical forces in Jammu and Kashmir are hurting the growth and well-being of those Kashmiri children. And the expert says the children in Kashmir are being increasingly exposed to the violence, which has plagued the region for decades. The children in Jammu and Kashmir are living in the most militarized zone in the world, with the presence of 700,000 Indian troops, which exposes them to the risk of all 6 grave violations against the children as laid out by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. The children in Kashmir are witnessing 2 types of violence. First, there's a direct effect violence towards them by killing, torture, or arrest. And the second, when they see their families suffering, their life is shaped by the sense of injustice, and the tendency to accept violence increases with the time. All these things hurt their mental health, their physical health, their emotional well-being. These military clampdowns and now this coronavirus pandemic have closed all the schools in Indian administered Kashmir for more than a year. And there's a warning about the mental health toll on the students whose lives have been repeatedly disrupted. It gets worse if it is prolonged amid uncertainties in the backdrop of living in a conflict zones like Kashmir. There is no school, no routine, no structure, no healthy recreation, predictability, which are essential for the normal growth and the emotional development. There are 62 million kids are out of school in the world. And out of those 62 million, there are 1.5 million Kashmiri children who are out of the school. The parents in Kashmir Valley are terrified of sending their children out because there are troops everywhere. They will be stopping them, harassing them, searching them, or even just abduct them. And the older students who were dreaming to become professionals one day, their dreams are shattered already. This generation of Kashmiri children has been among the hardest hit. They have known nothing but the conflict. For the past 10 years, huge protests, clashes keep erupting. Many young people have seen their friends got killed, maimed, or hauled off by the security forces. Their schools are constantly closing, and sometimes for the months or over the years. These long closures of the schools in the valley is causing major disruptions in young people's educational and professional development. They have the feeling of insecurity, hopelessness, and demoralization, while the whole world is watching and doing nothing. India has waged the war against Kashmiris just for demanding their basic right to self-determination. And it has crossed all the barbarism. And no aspect of a child's life is spared by the Indian occupational forces and intelligence agencies there because of their vulnerability. They are prime victims of multiple physical and emotional abuse and dangers such as violence and displacement. Children are at high risk of becoming separated for their families. And this trauma is more devastating even than the displacement itself. Kashmiri separated minors are extremely vulnerable, especially the girls, the younger girls or younger women, because they are the highest target for the sexual violence, exploitation, and abuse by those officers. India is at non-compliance even after signing the Charter on the Rights of the Child in the occupied territory. It is simply atrocious, condemnable, and disgraceful. These reports emerging from Kashmir indicate that terror, this is a state terrorism against the children, is a deliberate tactic to break the will of Kashmiri people to abandon their support to the liberation movement. Indian Army has destroyed hundreds of schools and made them their bases to curb down innocent children and young people. This is a crime against humanity. The world bodies should take action and India must be held accountable. This crime against humanity must be punished. India should learn from her history that the nights of cruelty always come to the end and the dawn of freedom is always there. And I also demand international community to intervene and make India release all those children who are held in prisons and detention centers and interrogation centers for last couple of years. All those military, paramilitary, and police officials who are directly or indirectly responsible for the killings, raping, and abusing Kashmiri children, women, and girls must be arrested forthwith and tried in the international criminal courts. The children must be ensured their right to live and a free life, to education, healthcare. This has been happening in Kashmir since 1947. And I remember my village, my maternal village, Neelam Valley, where my mother is from, we were always in the fear whenever I visited that area, and they have little caves whenever India is firing. My father's vehicle was hit by the Indian mortar bomb. Luckily, he survived, but that gives us all the trauma. What if he died? What if he was martyred by the Indian occupational forces? That would have leave us in the trauma that can never be, compromised. So as a Kashmiri, I'm very happy to all the hosts, this COPAIR, the distinguished professors, social scientists, ambassadors, and everyone who came together today to celebrate the Human Rights Day. But unfortunately, being the citizen of Kashmir, I cannot celebrate this Human Rights Day because my right to live, my children or my generation's right to live, to life, to liberty, to choose, to well-being, to healthcare is totally compromised by the Indian tyrannical forces. I thank you all for giving me this opportunity to be part of this esteemed event. Thank you.
Thank you, Syed M. Kazmi. I think it's a very important subject which you highlighted, and inshallah you'll be the part of the team. This team is going to be led by Dr. Tehseen Nisar. We request her to initiate this global movement and engage the international community, and you are now the part of that international community, and we keep on raising our voice. So inshallah, thank you very much. So I request Dr. Tehseen kindly move ahead to the next speaker, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Also on my part, Mr. Syed M. Kazmi, to have profoundly covered the issue of the Indian atrocity against innocent Kashmiri civilians, and specifically children who have been attacked by the pellet guns, which is something so atrocious. And I share your pain, and I share all the agony that you have suffered as a Kashmiri. And I am with you. We are here for actually commemorating all the losses and all the injustices to the victims of Indian atrocities in Kashmir. Our next speaker is Ms. Barbara Gallo, who is also a fellow colleague of mine at the Archivio Disarmo Institute of Research on Conflict and Peace Studies based in Rome, Italy. Barbara Gallo is also a journalist and an expert on the geopolitics of conflicts in the area of the Asian subcontinent, and in particular, the political situation of Kashmir linked to human rights violations. She has also in the past collaborated with UNICEF Italy in advocacy activities with a particular focus on the rights of women in Afghanistan. She is the author of over 250 articles on topics such as human rights, situation of women and children in the conflict areas, and that of the weapons of mass destruction. I welcome Ms. Gallo to this webinar of ours, and I would really love to hear her views and opinions. So welcome. The floor is yours, Barbara Gallo.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'm really thankful to Tehseen Nisar and Amna Malik to give me again the chance to be here with you today. And I greet all those guests with whom I have the honor of sharing this interesting discussion. On the day of the anniversary of the Human Rights Declaration, which the Article 19 recites that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinion without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through media and regardless of frontiers. I would like to speak about a country where these rights have been totally overridden, Kashmir. 70 years after the partition of the Indian subcontinent, there has been no change for the bereaved and pained people of Kashmir, who still remain under the punitive and strenuous weight of the Indian occupation. For decades, Kashmiri have been struggling for the exercise of the right to self-determination. On the 5th of August 2019, with the presidential decree revoking the Article 370 and 35A of the Constitution, India illegally merged the disputed territory of Jammu and Kashmir. According to the Indian government, the merger, although unlawful, ended the quarrel of occupied Kashmir. The arrival of around 900,000 Indian soldiers made the region the most militarized zone in the world. De facto abrogation of those articles that granted the autonomies of the region through illegal and arbitrary amendments undermines the rules of law for Kashmir citizens, stripping millions of people of their fundamental political rights. For many years, Kashmiri have experienced a dramatic increase of all forms of violation of human rights, such as extrajudicial execution, rape, torture, brutality against civilians. Last but not least, the Indian government issued a blackout on media communication, which has put a stop to the free speech and independent information. Freedom of expression is a basis of democracy, and that is why the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner of the United Nations released a report in July 2019 where they stressed the international concerns about the abuses by security forces and armed groups in both Indian and Pakistan and parts of Kashmir. There is no doubt this repressive campaign in Kashmir began soon after Modi landslide election victory, which confirmed the BJP political dominance. Unfortunately, this led to an unprecedented anti-democratic steps in pursuit of his Hindu nationalist agenda. One of the most dangerous weapons used by the current Bharatiya Janata Party-led government is represented by the blackout of communication in Kashmir. The Indian government also imposed a severe communication block that included digital and non-digital communication, mobile phone or landlines, along with a curfew which forced heavy restriction on mobility within the region. While the authorities had previously imposed more than 50 temporary connective disruptions in Kashmir, according to the SFLC, Defender of Your Digital Freedom, the latest blackout is the longest ever imposed by a democratic government. It started on the 4th of August 2019 and continues till date. In January 2020, the Supreme Court of India ruled that an indefinite interruption of internet services would be illegal under Indian law, and it would be considered as an arbitrary exercise of power. The orders of internet shutdown, indeed, must satisfy the test of necessity and proportionality. And it could not only be restricted when there is a risk against the citizen and in the name of national security. The Indian government has gradually restored landlines, but still millions of Kashmir do not have online access, and the Indian-controlled Kashmir remains largely unconnected to date. Abolishing free speech is clearly an Indian government strategic plan. This Modi assault on one of the most fundamental pillars of freedom provokes a very limited and incomplete information about what is really happening in the region, with the intention to shut out Kashmir from the rest of the world. According to Al Jazeera, several high-profile political leaders were arrested by Indian authorities, including 3 former chief ministers of the Muslim-majority state. Farooq Abdullah, 83 years old, president of the National Conference. Omar Abdullah, 49, former chief minister of Jammu and Kashmir. And Mehbooba Mufti, 60, who went down in the history as the last chief minister of Jammu and Kashmir state, since the region has now been brought under the central control. Kashmiri journalists and media in general have always faced this kind of threats, but the current blackout of communication isolated the entire region, making them unable to send or receive information which is critical in times of conflict and to counter disinformation. The Association for Progressive Communication officially condemns the prolonged and intentional disruption of communication services in Jammu and Kashmir. It is particularly crucial that stable communication infrastructure and services are maintained during times of conflict and key democratic moments. Communication blackouts often enable other violations of human rights, which can take place under cover of darkness with impunity, and considering the history of widespread abuse of human rights in Kashmir, this is particularly worrying. This kind of communication ban in Kashmir could be seen as a collective punishment, failing to meet the standard required under international human rights law to limit freedom of expression. On the 22nd of April 2020, Amnesty International stated that the Indian government must immediately stop intimidating journalists in Jammu and Kashmir, who have been summoned more than once to police station and forced to explain their articles. Often the Indian police justify their action invoking the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, UAPA, which is the Indian principal counter-terrorism law. But part of it does not recognize international human rights standards. UAPA has been used to target journalists and activists who openly criticize the government policies. Prior to Modi's election, the Indian Constitution had always guaranteed the rights of all citizens to the freedom of religion, expression, speech, and equal treatment before the law. My question is the international community doing all it can in order to stop violence in Kashmir? The international actors and institutions, as well as the United Nations, cannot ignore the Indian government's turn toward authoritarianism, which risks to undermine India's founding principle of a secular democracy. But the impression is that the UN is inadequate to solve the issues of the illegal invasion. There is more. In November 2020, the United States and India signed the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement for Geospatial Spatial Cooperation, which allows India to use US expertise on geospatial intelligence to enhance military accuracy of automated hardware systems and weapons, like cruise, ballistic missiles, and drones. So my question was, is the international communities doing all it can in order to stop violence in Kashmir? My answer is a bitter no. There is a pressing need to send a fact-finding mission to Kashmir. If not satisfied with the results, the observer could then deliberate the government to seek punitive policies against India and impose sanctions and boycotts on Indian goods. Meanwhile, an extraordinary job has been done by civil organizations, as the international campaign called Keep It On, a coalition of 210 organizations from 70 countries around the world, which constantly monitors the violation of freedom of communication. Nowadays, the campaign has concluded that the internet shutdown is not only a Kashmir issue, but a worldwide problem. According to the Keep It On report, in 2019, there was an increase in an internet shutdown. India topped the list globally of countries banning and shutting down major news networks, with a staggering of 121 incidents of shutdowns, included new states in an evident attempt to stifle dissenting voices. The India moves has spillover over on Venezuela with 12 times, Yemen with 11, Iraq with 8, Algeria with 6, and Ethiopia with 4. I just would like to conclude my speech underline that international human rights law underline that under an international human rights law, any restriction on the right of freedom or to freedom of expression but must be demonstrably necessary and proportionate, because the media play a crucial and fundamental role in reporting human rights abuses. Access to information is essential to inform the public about political situation and the measures taken by governments. The continued coercive and brinkmanship of India in Kashmir is tantamount to a genocide. Blood has been lost, and the most talented and dynamic leaders of Kashmir have been targeted. Thousands still await the punitive measure of illegal detention, killing, and ferociousness of treatment. We need to put a stop to all of this. The world organization must be more involved to solve this serious and tragic problem. And as the great Indian writer and political activist Arundhati Roy said, there is really no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced or preferably unheard. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barbara Gallo, for your very interesting and thought-provoking views about how India has been exploiting, the Kashmiris with a total blockade and with a total communication blockade that it has imposed on Kashmiris. And you have also mentioned how Amnesty International has been able to take up the issue, but you must also be knowing, I think that you must be aware of the fact that Amnesty is not operating from India now because it has closed its offices with regard to how the Indian government has actually blocked its, its official, its offices. So Amnesty is no longer working, and it is blocked for its services in India, which is actually a very, very, concerning news for human rights activists and rights organizations. And with this fact, I would like to have actually, I personally, in my capacity, I don't know whether anybody else has questions for you, but I have two questions for you. The first is that you talked about, the relevance of technology and how India got hold of, these kind of communications, and that they are signing contracts, and then, people should actually respond to what Indian moves are, what they are doing, and how they should be actually, reacted towards what the Indian moves are. So in my capacity, I have this kind of, query that how do you actually relate this Indian atrocious designs of sustaining its domination with the debate and discourse on human rights. And of course, linked with it is the freedom of thought, the issue of the freedom of thought, expression, and assembly. So this is the first question. Perhaps you can write it down. The second question is that since your research is more focusing on the issue of women's rights, I would be very interested in also asking you that how do you see the relevance of the debate on the rights of women in Kashmir, which are actually violated, and that of the human rights situation, particularly with regards to the larger debate on human rights and that of the human rights violation in Kashmir. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, very interesting question. I start with the last question about the women. Yes, women are, as the children in Kashmir, are the weakest part of the population that are targeted by Indian forces. So we know all the tragic situation of them that I said, and even my speaker before me told how they Indian forces are doing against civilians, against women, rape, torture, sexual violation. But I only wanted to tell that women can be, women are strong. Even especially in this situation, we know how much women are strong. So maybe it's important even not to see women only as a victims, but always also as a peace builder, peace mediators, because women have the capacity to be involved in political situation, political issues, and to help to resolve this problem. I always, every time I study a country, when women were in power, situation in some way changed. So I believe in a very strong involvement of women in political, because they can do many things, a lot of things. They are very great peace builders. So they are victims, but they became protagonists of the conflict zone, in the conflict zone. This is my point of view, of course. About the first question, yes, freedom of speech is one of the most important, is in Declaration of Human Rights. Is a weapon. When you block communication, you have the power to control the citizen, to control the population. India, everything changed with Modi, because this is a strategic plan. I told in my speech, because it's difficult to have news from that country. It's difficult to send and to receive news. So if no one in the world speak about Kashmir, Modi can continue his Hindus agenda in Kashmir. That's why we have, as a journalist, because this is my work, to be spread, to be informed, the public opinion, even because I don't believe in official institution. I told they are not doing enough for resolve the situation. So public opinion can do a lot, but we have to be informed. We have to inform, even in Italy. Even this is my role, to inform people around Europe, because people has to know what is happening in Kashmir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that you have really answered both these questions in a very, concrete and a very focused way. So thank you very much. I would appreciate if anybody else has questions for Ms. Barbara Gallo, he or she is welcome.
Thank you very much, Barbara. You always speak very well. I just want to ask you, there must be many other women organizations who would who would be worried about this Kashmir issue and women human rights violation over there. So don't you think that, what is the response of the international community, especially those women organizations in Europe?
In Italy?
In Italy?
In Italy, yes, there are. I worked for a organization that protect women, especially in Afghanistan, in Kashmir. But our voice is not so high. We have to work more. We have to work more, even because in the last period, many organizations, as Tessin told, in India has closed. It's very difficult to reach even the country to understand what is doing, what is happening in reality. But I believe in women power, in a possibility that women can do many things. So even in Italy, even in Europe, as I told before, we have to do more. This is my commitment first.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Yes, Dr. Tessin, please move ahead.
Yes, I think the other speaker is basically going to be explained by Awais. So Awais, I give the, authority of notice. Awais, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Ma'am, I think MP Imran Hussain hasn't joined us yet. So we can proceed with the other speakers.
Okay, all right. Our next speaker is Professor Dr. Angelo Sant'Agostino. Professor Sant'Agostino, can you hear and can you see me? Are you there with us?
Hi.
Okay, all right, perfect. Perfect. So thank you very much, Professor Dr. Sant'Agostino, for being part of this webinar. And I highly appreciate your presence here as a senior faculty. And obviously, as my association with you dating back to more than 20 years, I have a high level of regard for you. And I really, really appreciate your presence here to have honored us for your very expertise on South Asian and particularly issues relevant to Kashmir. So I would like to introduce Dr. Angelo Sant'Agostino. First, Dr. Sant'Agostino is currently a Jean Monnet ad personam chair in European Economic Integration Studies at the Ankara Yildirim Beyazit University, AYBU, since 2013, and he's been serving as the faculty at the Faculty of Political Sciences, Department of Economics. Previously, he was also a Jean Monnet professor and chair at Brescia University in Italy. At Ankara Yildirim Beyazit University, he delivers courses on integration studies, EU policies, and economic development. Professor Dr. Angelo Sant'Agostino's work is focused on the EU integration processes and on classical liberal thought. Professor Sant'Agostino has also taught in European, Latin American, and Asian universities between 1999 and 2002. He has managed the European Studies program at the Area Studies Center for Europe, University of Karachi. Since then, he kept close relations with the center.
Sorry, Dr. Tessin, we can't hear you. Wes, if you have the introduction, can you introduce Dr. Angelo, please? You take your time, Wes, and find out, please, because we are unable to hear from Dr. Tessin.
All right. So I'll take on from where Dr. Tessin left, as she was introducing Dr. Angelo Sant'Agostino. He's a chair in the European Economic Integration at Ankara Yildirim Beyazit University, AYBU, since 2013, at the Faculty of Political Sciences, Department of Economics, Previously, he was GM chair at Brescia University, Italy, and he's a commentator and columnist at the Giornale di Brescia. He has been a member of Montpellier Society since 2012 and the American Economic Society since 2018. He has been the member of Rotary International since 2001, and presently he's a member of the Rotary Club Ankara International. So, Professor will be speaking about the human rights question in Indian-held Kashmir. Over to you, sir.
Good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here again. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Tehseen for her presentation and Dr. Melange Host for integrating due to the audio problems. I hope you are hearing me well. If that is not the case, please
yes, sir. We can hear you loud and clear.
Know. And I want also to thank Dr. Anma Malik for inviting me for the second time to this conference, unfortunately online, on the issue of Kashmir. So, well, it's an honor, but it's also somehow bothersome because my recent intervention in August, and I would like to say some new and different things. Furthermore, I am, I guess, the last to speak, and so many things have been said. I followed with a huge interest of what has been said up to now, but in any case, my field of action has been somehow restricted. So I will try to get out of this situation by taking the cue of out of what has been said up to now, and maybe something. So first of all, I would like to mention the issue of self-determination, which has been evoked before by several interventions. Why? Because my impression as an observator, well, I am an economist, as it has been said, and particularly an economist of economics of integration and of the liberal economy. So I enter a field which is not properly mine. In any case, I want to take this this risk, this challenge, because as far as I know, the principle of self determination, no? My impression is that has been somehow abused in these times. It's not an absolute right, the right of self-determination. And I'm thinking, for instance, to the case of the Spanish separatism, no? What happened a couple of years ago, or some 3 years ago now, in Catalonia. Well, frankly speaking, I think that this is an abuse of the right of self-determination. This right has been elaborated in the context of decolonization, so has to be limited to this particular issue. And by the way, there is no question about the fact that this right exists in the case of Kashmir, not only because it's part of a resolution of the United States, of the United Nations, sorry, but also because it is strictly linked with the process of decolonization, in which this principle of self-determination has been elaborated. Well, another issue which I want to take the cue of is that of the deterioration of democracy, that we have, of which the case of which Kashmir is an example, and is a very, let's say, bad and a very sad example or case, better, but unfortunately it's not the only one. Or I could mention several other cases. We are seeing what is going on in the United States in these days. Nationalism, which produce wounds to democracy, and this resistance, of the outgoing President Trump. But there is not also just the case of what we could label as far right. There are also cases linked to far left. I'm thinking to the case of Latin America, the consequences of Chavez, Chauvinism has produced a lot of very bad and worrying effects, not just in Venezuela, which is a country in ruins, but also spread through other countries in Latin America. So on both sides, we see that nationalism, be far right or be far left, is producing wounds to democracy. And to come to the case of India, well, is sad to see what was labeled as the biggest democracy in the world and the best democracy in Asia to be reduced to such a worrying level. Well, what is going on in Kashmir has been widely and deeply and very well described by the previous intervention. What I want to say here is that it seems to me that we are seeing what what's going on in Europe after World War I, with the rise of fascism, with the rise of Nazism. And here I want to evoke a very beautiful novel written by a prominent Austrian novelist, which is Stefan Zweig. Stefan Zweig, in his book, The World of Yesterday, which is a book in which he describes his life from very youth to the rise of fascism and Nazism. And many of the things that he is reporting in this book out of his experience, out of his life in those years, is what we are seeing in several countries in these last years, and surely also in the case of India and the case of Kashmir. Always talking about democracy has been evoked the issue of minorities and majorities. Well, here I want to say that this elaboration over democracy has been taken on by a prominent liberal thinker, which is Friedrich von Hayek. Friedrich von Hayek was not just an economist, he was also a philosopher, so the second part of his life is more dedicated to philosophy than to economics. And he was elaborating his this concept, the fact that a democracy can turn into a tyranny of majority, and warn about this possible deterioration of democracy, in which the government doesn't take into consideration the right of minorities. Coming to the right of minorities, I remember that I am a scholar in European studies, so I want to remember what I think is one of the best, let's say, feature of the European Union, and is the same motto of the European Union: united in diversities. Without mentioning majorities and minorities, this motto says a lot. Say that we have a true federalism only if we take into consideration minorities. And actually someone, I don't remember exactly who was, defined the European Union as a union of minorities, where all minorities are respected and where minority is considered a richness. So something which has to be enhanced, be promoted, be well evaluated. And unfortunately, what we see in these days in Kashmir, because of the nationalist approach of the Modi's government, is against all these things. What we say is that nationalism is promoting a certain view of the things, a certain view of the world, and it is imposing these things, which is labeled as state view over all the population, disregarding their differences in culture, their differences in religion, their differences in tradition, and Kashmir is suffering this approach. Unfortunately, again, it seems that Mr. Modi is still widely supported by its electorate. Recent election in Indian state, Bihar, if I remember well, he won this election. So, in spite of COVID, in spite of his bad management of the COVID, in spite of what he is doing in Kashmir, I was reading these days, somehow well-known fact that he is accusing Muslims of spreading COVID. Muslims are rejected in hospital. It seems to me to go back to what a prominent Italian novelist Manzoni was saying, his description of the pest, this terrible disease which affected Milano in the 16th century, and where a certain person called Untori were considered as responsible of the spreading of this virus. So we go back as vision to many centuries ago, when the medicine was not developed at all. We can say how could be justified such a view, or be more, let's say understood. Another issue which has been raised is the attention that has been given by Western countries to the Kashmir issue, it is sure there has not been attention. As an Italian, I regret that on Italian newspaper we do not read almost anything about this. Maybe we read something about India. There have been protests in these days in India. There have been strikes by the farmers, by the peasant, but then the specific issue of Kashmir has not taken the attention of our media. And this is more or less the case of Europe and the case of the European Union. But there is an exception. And I want to end reminding this exception. The exception is France. France is a country which maybe is not so much popular in the Muslim world in this moment because of what happened, the terrorist attack and the reaction.
तुमने मेरी टाफियां वहां से लेकर इनको दी, टाफियां लेकर इसको दे दी।
कौन है टाफियां?
ये कह रहा था।
दे मुझे। भाई दे इधर ना ना। एक बार ये भाई अभी थोड़ा भी मीठा। वो दूसरी वाली टाफी दे।
हाँ, मैं अभी देख रहा दूसरी वाली कैसे पता था?
Kindly mute your.
टाफी क्या है? टाफी।
Abhi sir, kindly mute yourself.
Yes, Dr. Angelo, we are sorry.
Okay, no problem. I hope I are not linked to the fact that I mentioned France, because just after I mentioned France. So I don't want to go into the issue of the present, let's say, disagreement, if not quarrels, between France and many Muslim countries. But I want to remind the attention that the main French newspaper, which is Le Monde, gave to the Kashmir issue. There have been several articles in these last months, not just reporting what is going on, but reconstructing all the history of the let's say strained relation between India and Pakistan, and the going to the origin of the Kashmir issue. Sorry, I put on 15 minutes, so I'm going to, and also have been some editorial on Le Monde, the columnist of Le Monde, which described in a very worded way the deterioration of democracy in India and the suffering of the Muslims. So it's not France is labeled as a Islamophobic country. Well, it's not completely like that. So I have to say that the only newspaper in Europe who dedicated attention to the Kashmir issue and who, in a certain sense, highlighted the suffering of the Muslim have been the French newspaper Le Monde. So, come to an end. What can be done? What supranational institution can do? Because have been also evoked. So I take also the cue out of this. Well, I just limit myself to the European Parliament. Again, the European Parliament could have been done much more. Remember that we have a Charter of European Fundamental Rights, and if we analyze what is going on in Kashmir through the filter of this charter, we see a complete violation of the principle that we find in this charter. And my hope, my desire that the European Parliament should dedicate more attention to this issue, also because the voice of the European Parliament is important, and the voice which can reach member states, can reach other countries. So I think that is a very appropriate institution, place from which highlight what is going on in Kashmir and the flagrant violation of human rights in this country. That is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Angelo.
So moving on towards the end of our session, first I would like to ask the attendees and panelists if they have any questions from the professor. Yeah, I guess there are not any more questions. So, ma'am, should we proceed towards the end of our session?
Yes, yes.
Now, I would like to call President COPAIR, Ms. Amna Malik, to share her recommendations and way forward on this Kashmir conundrum. Ms. Amna Malik.
Thank you very much. Because we are having number of sessions and webinars and research reports, and I'm thankful to all the panelists who provided their research papers to us. I would like to make it an interactive session so that we can keep on adding points, and I would like to invite all of you that if you have any point while I'm sharing the recommendations with you, so all of you are most welcome. So I'll move step by step. I'm thankful to all of you that we discussed that Kashmiri humans are deprived of human rights. And I think on this International Human Rights Day, we need to raise more voices like we did today. So my first recommendation is that Pakistani government should revise its diplomatic strategy, and we should have more advocacy and lobbying at the international level, and we involve and we try to force UN and other international organizations to enforce Indian government on the right of self-determination, providing religious freedom to the Muslim minorities and protection of civil rights. I also agreed because one of the panelists mentioned that OIC played a very important role. So we can also further in future also offer OIC recommendations. Dr. Tansin mentioned about criminal court of justice, that we should also highlight the criminal human right violation, and we should opt over there as well. So on this point, I request Dr. Angelo, because in our last webinar, you mentioned about European Union intervention in human right violation on Kashmir little bit. And there are certain parliamentarians in Europe, and especially those from the Pakistani diaspora, who would like to highlight this issue in the European Parliament and in European Union. So how would like to recommend that how Pakistani government can play its important role, and how those parliamentarians can play an important role, and how the European Union can force Indian government that this is a human right violation, because Europeans always stand for the human right violation. So I request Dr. Angelo that what is your recommendation?
Well, I could give a recommendation, but then I think that we have appropriate institutions to have influence on the world affairs. I mentioned the European Parliament, but I could mention also the European Council, and somehow I could mention also the European Commission. I could also mention another, let's say, institution of the European Union, which is our, let's say, European Union external service action, and the High Representative, which is in this moment Jose Borrell. all institutions which could, through their action, spread influence, put pressure on the Indian government, so they are acting below their potentialities. Why that's so? Well, there's always the issues of the importance and the relevance of India as, let's say, economic power. So the fear to damage economic relation may connect as a constraint, to the develop the full action of these institution. However, the gravity of the situation calls for, and here now the parliamentarian that you are mentioning of the Pakistani diaspora could play an important role. But the European Parliament has, in his history, has sometimes taken a strong position against the violation of human rights. We have also this problem today, as today in the European Union, we have problem of rule of law, respect of rule of law. And in this moment in the European Parliament, in the European Council, they are quarreling concerning the, let's say, disregard toward the rule of law of two member states who are Poland and Hungary. This same moment they are discussing this issue. So the European Parliament, I think, could play a very important role. But has to take a more courageous action in such a specific field.
Okay, thank you very much. Then my second recommendation is that we can engage the other religious minorities and political parties in India, that their human rights violation cases are also there in India. So my recommendation and question is to Dr. Fabio, that how those religious minorities, like they are having Sikhs, they are having issues, there are Christians in India, they are having issues, and mostly they are the lower middle class in India which are really facing those issues. So what is your recommendation? Don't you think those religious minorities can also raise their voice against their government?
So the problem of India and Pakistan was born in 1948 with the Great Partition of countries that has composed a really problematic ethnical context. I think that India is formally a big democracy, but India presents a lot of contradiction that we can find in the presence of personal status and the division of the societies in different classes, and immediate relevance of religions in some subject. Indian government so does not do enough for minorities, and in particular for Kashmiri communities. And I think that a democracy must have the power to manage all the cultural identities of the state. What is happening in Kashmir is the demonstration of a failure in the functionality of a democracy. However, minorities The term minorities is a term that ecclesiastical doctrine does not appreciate very much, because the term minority remands to a majority differently regulated by law. Law must regulate the difference and must recognize the different, but on the basis of the equality of rights. I think that this is the problem. This is the problem. As Dr. Melidoro has said in his relations, multiculturalism does not need the equality of all communities and minorities, but it needs a base of equality in the exercise of rights. So religious minorities are the centrality of a society. And in India, we have a lot of communities that lives with rules that are not regulated by state law. India is a good democracy, but not for Kashmir, naturally, but India is not able to manage all the diversity of its social identity. So in Kashmir, there is a persecution in this moment. But in other situations of India, we have a total absence of the state. We have to remember what happens to women in India, to children in India that are subject to the application of rituals, of religious rules, ancient religious rules that are not acceptable in a modern democracy. So I think that the Kashmir is only one of the demonstration of the contradiction of the state India. The problems, in my opinion, however, were born in 1948 with the Greek partition and with the inclusion of Islamic communities in the Kashmir and Jammu. This is the problem, and it's not the case that that division was coordinated by Western colonial powers. And now in Kashmir, we are paying the consequences of that mistake. But it's important that minorities, starting from Kashmir, have a better recognition in international law. The tools that international laws provides for minorities are not at the moment enough to protect minority rights, even if the crime of persecution in its last evolution, jurisprudential and doctrinal evolution, can be used to protect minorities better than in the past. That's why before I spoke about the importance of religion, of religious authorities. The voice of religious authorities go upon and moves on a global level. The leaders, religious leaders, can speak to the global presence of faithful. And I think that this rule of religion can be an important tool to improve the condition of minorities, not only in India and in Kashmir, but all over the world. We have, for example, we have to remember what is happened in China with the Muslim minority that has solicited an intervention of all the religions also Catholic Church, Muslim authorities, Jewish authorities, because also in China, the Muslim minorities is persecuted. And so I think that religions can overall the difficulties of government measures that decline and destroy all the possibility to make emergence the voice of minorities. Religion is a good vehicle for minorities.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So my third point is that we need to engage the international community, especially the civil society, to protect the rights of the women, children, and people of Kashmiris, because Kashmiris are without human rights. So I request Dr. Domenico Meligoro that please highlight that how the civil society can play its role, and how we can utilize the digital media to spread this narrative, and there should be some infographic and statistics that these civil liberties are not provided by the Indian government. So please, Dr. Belligerent, please kindly unmute your mic.
So thank you. I'm not sure I can answer this question because I'm work more on political theory than on the issue you were mentioning. But still, I think that the protection of human rights is something that let's say is a progressive fight. I don't know if what I said is understandable, in the sense that human rights is not something that you get once, but it's something that you need to protect in the course of political history. So this means that, especially because when there are violation of human rights, often we have the problem of the conflict between community and individual. As you can guess, we have to try in practical terms to find a balance, let's say, between the individual and the community, because sometimes the gross violations of human rights are, in a sense, excusable if you compare the value of an individual and the value of a community. But still, I think that, let's say, in metaphysical terms, the basic unit of moral and political concern is individual. So when you talk about human rights, you should firstly consider how the individual lives go. So there is no point in saying that we, for instance, we violate these human rights because there is a community to protect. Okay, community is something that matters for individual concerns. So there is no metaphysical entity called community independently from the individuals who compose this community. So when we think about human rights, we should think about how individual lives go. So as I said, the fundamental unit of moral and political concerns is individual. There are no masses of individuals. There are individuals, and then there are groups. So I think that this is the idea that we should and I think that this is a universal idea. So also sometimes, for instance, with the scene, we had the opportunity to discuss about the different understanding of values, of principle, but I still think that there is something upon which we have to find an agreement. And I think that independently from our religious affiliations, from our political values, from our let's say, nationalistic orientations, we should find an agreement on the value of individual. So I think that only if we get this achievement, we can defend the human rights, and then we can find also, let's say, sorry if I'm too rough, but we can also find some common ground in order to have the intercultural dialogue, because this is, I think, the point of all these conferences and talks and discussion is that we have to find agreement between different people. So the difference of orientation should not be an obstacle to the proper understanding. And I think that if we get this achievement, so that if we find that the protection of individual life, individual aspirations, of individual equality is the basic of our discourse, we can get I don't know if a solution, but still a common ground for further discussions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Then my next recommendation is that there should be more international engagement, international networks, and there should be more international platforms to give our national or international perspective on Kashmir issue to find an amicable solution. Media and academia can play a very important role, I believe, and voices of reasons and responsibility can build pressure on India to give access to media in Indian occupied Kashmir. So I asked Barbara that how we can provide a platform, like we can just coin a word like Friends of Kashmir, where we can develop a WhatsApp group, digital media group, or some foreign academic support group, so they can provide some, research paper, articles, combine the work. And, this combined collaborative effort can really play an important role to highlight this human rights violation at the international level.
Yes, this is a good idea, of course, because as I told before, and my speaker before, I totally agree with Angelo Sant'Agostino, what he said about the European Union, that institution has to be face the realpolitik, that India is a big power. So that's why maybe the situation in Kashmir is still not, international community are not doing so much, because India is very big power for Europe. I'm talking about Europe, of course, but even for the rest of the world, of course. So I think that social societies, organization, a platform, network, and academia can do a lot of things for give voice to voiceless of Kashmir. So we have to promote, we have to spread through article, but even in university, in seminar, to create a network in Italy. I'm speaking about Italy, through the organization that talk about focusing on human rights, to create a network to arrive to the public opinion. I think this is something that social media and academia and researchers have to do for Kashmir, because I don't think that institution is too difficult that arrive at the real point. So this is something that mass media and academia, university and researcher can do. This is my commitment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Then our next recommendation is that we should work on track 2 diplomacy between India and Pakistan, confidence building measures, and international dialogue with different people and representative from the civil society, from the media of India and Pakistan. They discuss on different forums, because dialogue initiates some kind of solution, because this is the issue of not only the South Asian peace, but it is the issue of the global peace, because Indian hegemonic design are going to be a threat to not only to the South Asia, but it is a threat to the world. So it is very important that there should be intra-Kashmir dialogue as well as there should be dialogue between Indian and Pakistani citizens at the international forums, so that they should speak out, because what we mentioned earlier, that all of the citizens are not having the same kind of opinion what their government is having. Lastly, we mentioned and we should work on the lawfare, because lawfare is also another important tool to handle the crisis management and conflict management. And this unfinished agenda of Kashmir needs to be handled through the lawfare. So I request Dr. Tessin that if she has any recommendations regarding lawfare and any other suggestions if you have, so that then I have my final conclusion of the recommendations, please. Dr. Tessin, can you unmute? I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so thank you very much, Amna, and thank you very much to all our participants, and particularly the Italian team, the Italian squadra, as it's called, the squad, for your very valuable recommendations, particularly to Domenico, Fabio, Barbara, and Professor Sant'Agostino. In my capacity, I am a firm supporter of people-to-people level contact. And this is what actually Track 2 represents, and which in turn can really help build bridges between two hostile partners or hostile states, whatever you may call it. So in my opinion, and as I have said also in my previous recommendatory suggestions, I would like to also second what Barbara was saying, because I think that a lot can be done through the intellectual and academic exchange. There is a lot that can be contributed. There is a lot that needs to be contributed towards awareing the international community, and particularly we are sitting in Italy today. So we can really form an Italian-Pakistani caucus, which can guarantee that we are able to muster support of researchers and academicians and faculties that are representing from various academic institutions of Italy. And I think this platform of our Zoom meeting is one example of how we can actually make it forward, and we can carry it forward. So in my opinion, research publications and academic exchanges, and of course coverage through the media can be very instrumental modus vivendi of reaching up to how we can seek solution to this kind of it's kind of an intractable story between India and Pakistan. And in this capacity, I would also like to stress that perhaps interestingly, what we can do is that we can involve a lot of Indian diasporic community in our collaborative research, if practically it's possible, and if practically they are willing to, because I have noticed that there is a particular fear in them that they can feel sometimes vulnerable to, for example, whenever they go back to India, they can have this kind of a fear that what if there's something that the government could do. But I mean, there is this kind of a consensus of difference that can emerge. And we can, in my capacity, I will try my best also to engage those people, those students, the Indian students who can actually, even if they are not, very confident to come and really speak in front of us, but we can actually work collaboratively. We can actually ask them to, express some of their concern, at least to the least of, what they can contribute, so that it can be a good medium of exchange, at least coming from a point of view coming from India, which is otherwise not possible through official channels. So this kind of platform could be utilized. Secondly, we need to also see that in Europe we have many supranational organizations, like Professor Santagostino mentioned, European Union Council of Human Rights. We can actually write letter to European Council of Human Rights, asking them to at least consider, if only passing resolution or having a kind of a policy initiative. We can really, like, what we can do is that we can activate our ambassador and diplomatic caucus working in Europe, in embassies here, and you can ask them to write to the European Commission of Human Rights, European Council of Human Rights, to make it go forward. And institutional and of course educational collaboration is very important, as highlighted. Then of course academia and research. So I think that this is what I had to say. And I think, Amna, it's a wonderful channel of your organization, that at least we are able to hear the international community reacting to how situation in Kashmir is, and how active is the debate on Kashmir. So there is a completely false propaganda of India that nobody is talking about Kashmir, nobody can talk about Kashmir. And I think in this platform and through this platform, we have categorically, come forward and refuted this kind of a very, obscene mindset that nothing can be done and everything is so like, frozen. I think a lot can be done and a lot has to be done. We really have to mobilize. We really have to, work on it. We have to mobilize support. We have to mobilize communities. We have to mobilize, the intellectual, epistemic societies wherever we are. And so I think that there's a lot of contribution that these societies and these intellectual communities can render to the cause of Kashmir. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tehseen. Finally, my last recommendation is that Pakistan must engage international community through the responsibility to protect doctrine, to ensure international community through their voices and action, which can, I believe, stop Hindutva regime crime against humanity. As a part of the series of these webinars, after a few days, we are having another webinar on Hindutva, or we can call the Indian radicalization. So if anybody of you would like to attend that, we would like to share the invitation to you. And again, we are having international speakers in that, and we are trying to engage somebody from the other side as well, so that we also get to know their viewpoint and find out the solution and highlight Indian radicalism to the world. Finally, I would like to thank you, all of you, especially our honorable speakers, Dr. Angelo, Dr. Tehseen, Dr. Domenico, Melidoro, Barbara, Fabio, and other speakers. I'm really thankful to you, and I'm also thankful to my advisors who always support me, Khalid Mahmood Saab, and also Khalid Latif Saab. Because of their support, we and our research associate Uwais Siddiqui, Shujat, and Fahad, I'm really thankful to all of you, because it's a teamwork and we need to join hands together. We are going to collaborate and raise our voice, because human rights issue at any part of the world, we need to raise our voice. So I think this is a small effort. And today, the success of this webinar credit goes to all of you. We'll try to publish those recommendations, and we'll share the copy of those recommendations to you. Thank you very much, all of you. Have a nice weekend, and goodbye.